What if one person, with nothing but a pen and courage, could challenge an entire system built on fear and injustice? Imagine living in a time when truth itself was dangerous, when speaking out could cost you your home, your career, even your life. This is the story of Ida B. Wells, a woman who refused to stay silent in the face of terror and changed history because of it. In the summer of 1893, the city of Chicago was buzzing with excitement. People from all over the world gathered to witness the grandeur of the World's Fair, a dazzling showcase of innovation, culture, and progress. To many, it felt like a celebration of how far America had come. But for one visitor, something was missing. Ida B. Wells, a 31-year-old journalist from Mississippi, walked through the fairgrounds and saw not progress, but omission. African Americans, their achievements, their voices, were almost entirely absent. Yes, there were representations, but they were distorted, reduced to stereotypes, or pushed to the margins. And Ida refused to accept that. While others admired the spectacle, she saw something deeper, a carefully curated illusion of progress that ignored the truth. So instead of staying silent, she took action. Standing outside the Haitian Pavilion, one of the few places where Black excellence was acknowledged, Ida distributed a powerful pamphlet exposing the reality of racial injustice in America. It wasn't just information, it was a challenge, a confrontation, a demand for the world to see what America was trying to hide. But this moment in Chicago was only part of a much larger story. To understand Ida's courage, we have to go back to where it all began. Ida B. Wells was born into slavery in 1862 in Holly Springs, Mississippi, just months before emancipation. Her parents, James and Lizzie Wells, had endured the brutal realities of slavery. But after gaining their freedom, they did something remarkable. They didn't just survive, they pursued education, opportunity, and dignity with determination. Her father became involved in political life and education, helping build institutions for newly freed Black Americans. Her mother learned to read alongside her children. From a young age, Ida grew up in a home filled with ambition, resilience, and a belief in possibility. But she also grew up surrounded by danger. The shadow of racial violence loomed large. Groups like the Ku Klux Klan threatened Black progress at every turn. Ida didn't fully understand it as a child, but she felt it. The fear, the tension, the uncertainty. Then at just 16 years old, her life changed overnight. A yellow fever epidemic swept through her town. In a matter of days, both of her parents and one of her siblings were gone. Suddenly, Ida was no longer just a teenager. She became the head of her family. While others suggested separating the children, Ida refused. She made a decision that would define her character for the rest of her life. She would keep her family together no matter what. Armed with determination and responsibility far beyond her years, she found work as a teacher and took care of her siblings. Her days were exhausting, working, traveling, managing a household, but she never backed down. Because for Ida, survival wasn't enough. She wanted dignity, justice, equality. Eventually, she moved to Memphis, a growing city full of opportunity. It was there that Ida began to discover her voice. At first, she was a teacher, but something inside her was pushing for more. That more came through writing. What started as small articles quickly became something powerful. Ida realized that words, when used with purpose, could expose injustice, challenge authority, and awaken people. She wrote simply, clearly, and directly so that everyone could understand. And soon, people started paying attention. But Ida wasn't writing to please anyone. She was writing to tell the truth, even when that truth made people uncomfortable.
What would you do if someone tried to strip away your dignity in public, simply because of who you are? Would you stay quiet? Or would you fight back, even if you stood alone? For Ida B. Wells, that moment came on an ordinary train ride. But what happened next would change the course of her life forever. In the early 1880s, Ida was working as a school teacher while helping support her family. Life was far from easy, but she had built stability through discipline and determination. And like many professionals of her time, she often traveled by train. One morning, just after her 21st birthday, Ida boarded a train to Woodstock, Tennessee. She had a first-class ticket, paid for, legitimate, and fully within her rights. She took her seat in the ladies' car. At first, everything seemed normal. But then, the conductor approached her. His message was simple and insulting. He told her she had to move, not because her ticket was invalid, not because the seat was taken, but because she was black. The conductor demanded that she move to the smoking car, a place known for being dirty, crowded, and filled with men drinking, gambling, and using foul language. For Ida, this wasn't just about a seat. It was about respect. It was about dignity. And she refused. Calmly but firmly, she told him she would not move. What happened next shocked everyone in the carriage. The conductor tried to physically remove her, and Ida fought back. She resisted with everything she had, grabbing, pushing, even biting his hand to stop him. Eventually, it took multiple men to force her out of her seat, and as she was dragged away, something even more disturbing happened. The passengers applauded. That moment burned into Ida's memory. Not just the injustice, but the acceptance of it. The way people normalized humiliation. The way society sided with oppression. But Ida wasn't done. She decided to fight back, not with her fists this time, but with the law. She filed a lawsuit against the railroad company, and in an extraordinary turn of events, she won. The court ruled in her favor and awarded her $500 in damages. It was a rare victory for a black woman in that era, a moment of justice in a system that rarely offered any. But the victory didn't last. The case was appealed and overturned by the Tennessee Supreme Court. This time, the narrative shifted. Instead of focusing on the injustice she faced, the court attacked her character, claiming she was disruptive and unladylike. Just like that, the system revealed its true face. For Ida, this was a turning point. Until then, she had believed in the fairness of the law. Now she saw its limitations. She realized something powerful and unsettling. Justice was not guaranteed, especially for people like her. This realization didn't break her, it transformed her. Around this time, Ida became more deeply involved in writing. She joined a community of black educators and thinkers in Memphis, a space where ideas were shared, debated, and refined. It was here that her voice began to sharpen. She started contributing articles to local publications under the pen name Iola. Her writing was direct, fearless, and deeply connected to the struggles of her community. She wrote about education, inequality, and the everyday realities Black Americans faced. But she didn't just report problems, she challenged them. As a teacher, Ida witnessed firsthand how black schools were underfunded and neglected compared to white institutions, so she wrote about it, boldly, publicly, and without hesitation. She even criticized the very system she worked in, including school officials and leadership. That kind of honesty came with consequences. When the next school year arrived, her teaching contract was not renewed. She had lost her job. But what she gained was something far more powerful: clarity. Ida realized that her true calling wasn't in the classroom, it was in journalism. She took a leap of faith and became part owner and editor of a black newspaper in Memphis, and that decision changed everything. Under her leadership, the paper's influence grew rapidly. Her words reached more people, her voice became louder, and her message became impossible to ignore. But with visibility came danger, because Ida wasn't just writing stories, she was exposing truths that many wanted to keep hidden. Truths about racism, about inequality, about violence, and soon she would uncover something even more disturbing, something that would define her legacy forever.
What if everything you were told was a lie? What if the stories used to justify violence weren't just exaggerated, but completely false? For Ida B. Wells, this realization didn't come from theory, it came from tragedy. In 1892, Ida was building her career as a journalist in Memphis. Her newspaper was gaining influence, and her voice was becoming stronger with every article she wrote. But then, devastating news reached her. 3 black men had been lynched. Among them was Thomas Moss, a close friend of Ida's, someone she trusted deeply, someone she considered family. This wasn't just another headline. This was personal. Thomas Moss and his partners had opened a successful grocery store in a predominantly black neighborhood. Their business was thriving, and that success made them a target. A white store owner nearby saw them not as competitors, but as a threat. Tensions escalated. What began as a small conflict quickly spiraled into something much darker. One night, a group of white men attacked. Moss and his friends tried to defend themselves, but instead of being protected by the law, they were arrested, and then taken from jail by a mob. They were brutally lynched. No trial, no justice, no mercy. For Ida, this moment shattered something inside her. Until then, she, like many others, had been told that lynching was a response to crime, particularly the alleged assault of white women. It was a narrative repeated over and over again, a justification, an excuse. But Thomas Moss didn't fit that narrative. He was respected, peaceful, a businessman. So why was he killed? That question changed everything. Instead of accepting the explanation society offered, Ida began to investigate. She didn't rely on rumors. She didn't repeat what others said. She went out and gathered evidence herself. Traveling across the South, she interviewed witnesses, studied reports, and carefully documented each case she could find. What she discovered was shocking. The majority of lynching victims were not guilty of the crimes they were accused of. Many weren't accused of any crime at all. Some were targeted for economic success, others for speaking out, some simply for existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. The truth was clear. Lynching wasn't about justice. It was about control. It was about fear. It was a tool used to maintain power. Ida took everything she uncovered and turned it into powerful, fearless writing. Her editorials didn't just inform. They confronted. They exposed. They challenged the very foundation of the system that justified violence. She openly rejected the widely accepted myth that black men were lynched because they posed a threat to white women, and in doing so, she crossed a line that few dared to approach. Her words spread quickly. People read them, talked about them, reacted to them, but not everyone welcomed the truth. In fact, her writing triggered outrage, especially among those who felt threatened by it. A white newspaper editor reprinted her work and called for revenge. He didn't even realize the author was a woman. He demanded that the person who wrote those words be punished, brutally. And soon, that anger turned into action. A mob gathered in Memphis. Their target? Ida's newspaper office. They stormed the building, destroyed the printing press, burned everything they could. Her life was now in danger. But Ida had made a critical decision. She left Memphis, not because she was afraid to speak, but because she knew she needed to survive to continue the fight. Exiled from her home, cut off from everything she had built, Ida faced a new reality. She had lost her newspaper, her community, her sense of safety, but she had not lost her voice. If anything, she became even more determined. From outside the South, she continued writing, reaching wider audiences than ever before. She published detailed reports exposing the truth about lynching. She spoke across cities, across countries, telling the world what was happening in America. She turned her personal loss into a global mission. And her message was no longer just about awareness, it was about resistance. She argued that black communities had the right to defend themselves, especially when the law refused to protect them. This made her even more controversial, even more dangerous in the eyes of those in power. But Ida didn't care about being comfortable. She cared about being truthful. And slowly, her work began to shift the conversation. People could no longer ignore what was happening. The narrative was changing. The truth was coming out. But Ida's fight was far from over. Because exposing injustice is one thing. Changing a system built on that injustice, that's something else entirely. What does it take to change the world? Is it power, wealth, fame? Or is it something far more rare? The courage to keep going when everything is against you. For Ida B. Wells, the answer was simple: relentless truth. After being forced out of Memphis, Ida didn't disappear, she expanded. From Chicago to New York, from the United States to Europe, she carried her message across borders, exposing the brutal reality of lynching to international audiences. She understood something many didn't. If the truth was ignored at home, it could be amplified abroad, and that's exactly what she did. Through powerful publications and speeches, she documented hundreds of lynching cases, carefully collecting data, testimonies, and evidence. She transformed scattered incidents into undeniable proof. Proof that this wasn't random violence, it was systematic, intentional, and deeply rooted in racism. But Ida wasn't just a journalist, she was a strategist. She knew that real change required more than awareness, it required organization. So she began building alliances. Working with activists, reformers, and thinkers, she became part of a growing movement demanding civil rights and justice. One of the major outcomes of this collective effort was the creation of the NAACP, an organization that would go on to play a central role in the fight for equality. But even here, Ida faced resistance. Despite her experience, her influence, and her groundbreaking work, she was often pushed aside. Why? Because she was a woman. Because she spoke too boldly. Because she refused to soften the truth. Still, Ida didn't wait for permission. She created her own path. She became deeply involved in the fight for women's voting rights. At a time when even the suffrage movement was divided by race, Ida stood firm. When organizers of a major march tried to force black women to walk separately, she refused. She stepped forward and joined her delegation anyway. It was a small act, but a powerful one, because it sent a clear message: equality cannot be selective. Back in Chicago, Ida focused on her community. She saw the struggles of black migrants arriving from the South, people searching for opportunity, but often finding hardship instead. So she took action. She helped create organizations that provided support, housing, jobs, legal aid, and guidance. She didn't just fight injustice from a distance, she worked directly with the people affected by it. Ida also stepped into politics. At a time when women had limited power, she mobilized black women to organize, vote where possible, and influence change. Her efforts helped shape local leadership and strengthen community voices. But all of this came at a cost. Years of constant work, stress, and resistance took a toll. She didn't receive the recognition she deserved during her lifetime. In fact, many people didn't fully understand the impact of her work until much later. As she grew older, Ida began writing her autobiography, not for fame, not for praise, but for truth. She wanted future generations to know what had happened, to understand the struggles, to learn from them. But she never finished it. In 1931, Ida B. Wells passed away, leaving her story incomplete. And yet, her impact was anything but incomplete. Decades later, her work would be recognized and honored. Her name would be remembered, her contributions acknowledged. She would receive awards she never lived to see. But perhaps the most powerful part of her legacy isn't found in awards or recognition. It's found in the movements that continue her work, movements that challenge injustice, that demand accountability, that refuse to stay silent. From civil rights activism to modern social justice movements, the echoes of Ida's voice are still heard today, because the issues she fought against haven't completely disappeared. And that's exactly why her story matters. Ida B. Wells once wrote that freedom requires constant vigilance. In other words, justice is not something you achieve once, it's something you fight for again and again. Her life is proof that one person, armed with truth and courage, can challenge even the most powerful systems. Not easily, not quickly, but meaningfully. So the question now isn't just who Ida B. Wells was. The real question is, what will you do with the truth once you see it?